right. I think this probably would be a good time to start the training. First of all, I want to welcome you all and thank you all for attending this training on the data officer best practices. As many of you may know, my name is Caroline Kuipers and I am a senior research associate here at the Office of Indigent Legal Services. And other people on the call are, well, there's many colleagues from ILS that are on the call, but my co-presenter for today will be Lucelle Chisunka, and she is a statewide implementation analyst at ILS. I would say, Lucelle, do you feel ready to get this started? And then Lucelle will do the first part of the presentation today, and then you will see me a little later again.
Okay, thank you, Caroline. As Caroline said, today's training is going to focus on your role and responsibilities as a data officer. Next slide, please.
Yep.
Okay. So just a brief introduction and overview. We're going to go over the introduction. I will go over the first two best practices, ILS's mission and role of the data officer, and communicating with providers. Then you're going to hear some remarks from our counsel, Patricia Ward. And then the training is going to be turned back over to Caroline, who'll go over the last three best practices, ILS data reporting requirements, case management system, and coordinate data reporting and work plan. Next slide, please. So the ILS Data Officers Best Practices Guide has been developed to assist data officers as they navigate the ILS reporting requirements. As a data officer, you will be expected to communicate, collaborate, and sometimes even guide mandated representation providers through the data reporting process. So all of you should have received a best practices guide via the data officers listserv. If you haven't, for some reason, received it already, you can send us an email at data@ils.ny.gov, and someone from our research team will send you a copy. Next slide, please. Okay, so how do you get to a place where you somewhat easily, and it unfortunately will never be 100% easy, but somewhat easily can communicate, collaborate, and guide mandated representation providers through this data reporting process? There are several resources available for you. The first one is to review the ILS website. I'll be going over in a bit more detail later on in the training of what you can find on the website. Number two is communicating with county providers. There should be an open line of communication between you and providers. ILS requires 100% compliance, and we are looking to the data officers to ensure that each provider knows when reports should be submitted and works with providers to make sure that they are submitted on time. Number three, understanding ILS data officer reporting requirements. It's important that you become familiar with what data is required for each report. Know before you contact a provider what data is needed and which report it is for. I do know, just from our experience, there are a lot of similarities between the ILS 195 and the performance measures. And during this training, we'll give you some resources so that to better help you differentiate between the two. Number four, research case management systems. So many of your providers may already have a case management system, but you should ask if it's able to record the data outlined in our requirements. So Caroline will speak more to how ILS can help you if you're looking to upgrade your case management system. And number five, coordinate data reporting and develop work plans with providers. So since the Harrell Hearing statewide expansion began in 2017, the number of reports that must be submitted to ILS has expanded from just the annual financial report to include the ILS 195 and the performance measures. As a data officer, work with providers to develop a work plan so that when reports are due, you have enough time to compile accurate data and, again, submit the reports on time. So right now you might be asking yourself, why is ILS specifically asking us to do this? Next slide, please. The mission of ILS, the New York State Office of Indigent Legal Services, monitors, studies, and makes efforts to improve the quality of representation provided to public defense clients in New York State's family and criminal courts. ILS recognizes that gathering accurate, comprehensive, and reliable data is an essential component of implementing indigent defense reform. So ILS is responsible for the distribution of state funds, and ILS requires that each of the 52 New York counties and New York City designate a data officer to work with ILS. So what exactly does that mean? It means that your role, the role of a data officer, is required as per the statewide contract. So some of you may remember when you complete the performance measures progress report, it asks the question, has the county designated an ILS data officer? That's because in each statewide contract in the performance measures, it said each county must do so. So you're here, you're a data officer, you're doing the job, but where do you fit in between ILS, the providers, and the county? Next slide, please. Data officers are the primary point of contact between ILS and the mandated representation providers in your county on matters related to data reporting. Therefore, it is imperative that you are well-versed in ILS data reporting requirements and the data reporting deadlines throughout the year. ILS has developed a number of different resources to keep data officers informed about existing and emerging data reporting requirements. So 2 things immediately that you need to make sure that you recognize: you're the primary point of contact, which means that you should be the best, very well versed in all matters related to data reporting. You have to understand, 1, what the data reporting requirements are, and 2, the data reporting deadlines. But there's also a third component, and Carlin, can you go back to the last slide, please?
Sure.
And that is, I'm going to read one sentence over again. Gathering accurate, comprehensive, and reliable data. That's the third part of this that is extremely, extremely important. That means that you need to make sure that you are reading through the instructions and definitions, that you're reading through all of the questions to make sure that the data that you are gathering and that you are reporting is accurate. Next slide, please. So how can you familiarize yourself with all of these different reports, all of this different information? A great resource for you is the ILS website. Now, please be advised that our website is undergoing some maintenance, so it may be a little bit wonky at times because we're going to be rolling out a new website soon. But there are 2 pages that are really, really essential for you. The first one is the annual data reporting page, which outlines the 3 reports: the ILS 195, the performance measures, and the annual financial report. So there are PDF and Word versions of the annual financial report. There is a PDF of the ILS 195. There's a PDF of the performance measures. You can find training and instructional videos on this page. There's a glossary. There are frequently asked questions. Additionally, the annual data reporting page also provides you with the data email inbox link, where you can send questions regarding the ILS 195 and the annual financial report. And it also provides you with the performance measures email inbox link, where you can send questions about the performance measures. Now, of course, the ILS website also provides the contact information for everyone on the research team if you want to reach out to us at any time with any questions. Next, you should explore the Data Officer's webpage. This page includes every training ILS has hosted for the data officers since the kickoff meeting in November 2019, and all distributed materials. It also has the criminal caseload standards, case definition, and it lists future data officer training dates. If there's something that you missed, if there's a training that you want to look over again, if there's a PowerPoint that you want to go over, it is most likely on this webpage. Now, lastly, and I like to think of it as a companion to the website, is the ILS Data Officers listserv. If you're not already on it, what are you waiting for? It's the best place to be. Send us your email address and we'll add you. You get announcements, you get updates, and all the materials that we go over in trainings will be shared via the listserv. But just as an FYI, if you email dataofficer@listserv.com, you are emailing every single data officer in the state. So if you have a question that you want to only be seen by the ILS researchers, email data@ils.ny.gov. But if it's a question that you want to go out to every data officer in the state, that most of who are on this training right now, then you email data officers at listserv, just to be able to differentiate between the two. So that takes care of communication with ILS, but what about communicating with providers? Next slide, please. As the main point of contact between ILS and the mandated representation providers in your county, communication is key. You may be asked when reports are due, what data is required, and yes, you will probably even sometimes be asked why they have to do this at all. And I'll repeat the data officer inbox again, the email address again, why you have to do this at all. So ILS created the data flowcharts, which many of you have already submitted. Thank you. You can use these flowcharts to keep track of the types of representation in your county, eligibility, attorney assignments, case management systems, and of course with the assigned counsel program vouchers. The data flowchart is also a great way to build institutional knowledge so that if someone in your provider office has questions or if there's someone new on staff, they can look to this document to familiarize themselves with how to track the life of the case. Once you know who's in charge of what data, it's important to keep in touch with data entry staff to make sure that you are up to date on any changes to data entry staff members' responsibilities, and that you understand how and when they receive data, and that the data is being entered into the case management system. Now, some of you already have built a great rapport with the providers in your county. You have providers who are extremely engaged in the reporting process, and so there is an open line of communication that already exists. For those of you who are new or who don't necessarily have that relationship already, don't hesitate to call or email a provider and say, I've attended the data officer trainings, I've gone on the ILS website, and I've reviewed all of the resources. And I know that right now in February, the PDF version of the report is already on the ILS website. And I can use that as a draft while I gather data. Right now, I can start collecting data for the reports that are due in April. Can we meet so that we can get the data together and ensure that this report is submitted accurately and on time? Now, some of you may receive pushback from staff on all the data is required, and you're wondering what exactly your role is in pushing attorneys to make sure that the data is recorded and submitted. Your goal as data officer, again, we want you to be the main line of communication. And so we want to make sure that you maintain a good relationship. Your role as data officer is to facilitate the reporting process, but the reporting obligation is not yours. And I'm actually going to turn it over to our counsel right now, Patricia Ward, who's going to speak a little bit to exactly what that means.
So I want to start by saying that as counsel, you probably guessed I'm a lawyer. I'm not a cat. Just want to clarify that. But that means that I think and talk like a lawyer. So, I apologize. But, there has been a lot of, I think, very good and understandable questions, both from data officers and from providers and county officials on, clarity on what is the role of the data officer. And I want to circle back to something that Luchelli said earlier. The data officer is the primary point of contact between ILS and the providers and county officials so that the providers can gather and report accurate and complete data, right? It's not your responsibility to gather and report it. It's your responsibility to ensure that the providers understand what the structures they have to have and the protocols they have to have in place in order to accurately gather and report, accurate and complete data, and that the providers understand their reporting obligations, and that if there are issues, we know of them so that we can take action to do something about them. Again, that's sort of the role, right? You're the primary point of contact between ILS and the providers and county officials. To clarify on who has what responsibility, yours the responsibility of being that point of contact and being the expert in your county on how to gather and report accurate data, what the data requirements are, and what the reporting obligations are. Under the law, it is, just to clarify this, the ILS 195, which is due in April of each year, that is a legal requirement under County Law 722F. And that requirement is the provider's legal obligation to report it, to complete that report. Now, the providers can ask you for assistance. They can ask you to do it and to make sure it's accurate before sending it in. They can ask you to review what they're going to send, which we would encourage so that you understand and know what's being sent. But at the end of the day, under the law, it's the provider's responsibility. The ILS annual financial report, which is also due in April of each year, that is the legal obligation, again, of the county. And that is a report that is legally required under County Law 722F. And then finally, the performance measure reports that are due biannually each year, those are a function of the contract. They are required as a function of the contract between ILS and the county. And the county, of course, delegates to providers the responsibility to complete that contractual obligation. So technically, that's a provider obligation to complete those reports. But again, with the assistance of your expertise in making sure that the providers know how to gather the information, that they have the infrastructures and protocols in place to do it, and that they fully understand what their reporting requirements are, and that they meet the deadlines. Because it's very important that the deadlines are met. So, so I just sort of wanted to outline that. And Luchelli and Caroline, do you want to add anything to that?
Not at this point. No. I might, reflect back on it while I'm presenting my part. Luchelli?
No, I'm all set.
Okay. This might be a good moment also to see if there's any questions among the people on the call. So feel free to unmute yourself and to speak if you have any questions. All right. Well, I will create some more opportunity to ask questions later on. So please don't hesitate to bring them up, because this training is also, of course, aimed at, answering any questions you may have. We want to help you to understand what your role should be. So then I think it's time to go to best practice number 3. Best practice number 3 is all about understanding ILS's data reporting requirements. And as has been said before, sorry.
We got a question in the chat box.
Oh, okay. Sorry, yeah, I can't see that.
I know you can't see them, so that wasn't sure. Okay. It's from Dave Montgomery from Montgomery County. Are there specific consequences of not properly reporting established, i.e., what are the teeth?
The teeth are constant nagging from us. But for real, I mean, a good way to explain it is with statewide implementation of the Hurrell Herring Settlement Initiative, the state is contributing by year 5 of this contract over $250 million a year to measures to improve the quality of representation. That's a huge and significant state financial contribution, and it's unprecedented in New York that the state has contributed so much money to public criminal defense. The state expects to see data and information to make sure that the funding is being spent as intended. So long-term, the consequences of not completing this data is, frankly, the state deciding that it's not going to continue its current obligation to fund this initiative. And I can tell you, as having worked previously with agencies that receive state funding, the state typically requires reporting to make sure that the funding is being used to have its intended consequence. Now, that's a long-term impact, but it's a real one. If we can't show through the data that you provide to us that this funding is working as it should, that's going to present a problem long-term in the state's commitment to continue this obligation. And I should also add, by the way, that with the recent executive budget proposal for the fiscal year 21 and 22 budget, that the state continued its commitment to fully fund the Hurrell Herring statewide initiatives with an additional $50 million, which is the full amount of what ILS requested in fiscal year 21-22. The state did this despite an unprecedented budget crisis, which shows how strong the state's commitment is. We need that state to continue that commitment, and we need to make sure that we're getting the information that encourages the state to do so. So that's a long-term consequence. The short-term consequence really is exactly what I said, pestering from us, because it's vitally important that we get this information. And we've worked very, very hard to streamline what is required so that we understand that for providers across the state, gathering this type of information is a new endeavor. We get that. And we've worked very hard to streamline it so that we're getting the information that is absolutely necessary, the bare minimum of the information absolutely necessary to report to the state what is required. So I hope that answers your question, but I can't emphasize enough, and I know that Luchelli and Caroline have been working with you on also emphasizing how important it is that we get this information.
There's actually another question from Diane Lovejoy. Since we are to sign that we have reviewed and that reports are accurate, doesn't that make us responsible?
And Diane, you're saying that as a provider who submits the information? Because yes, it does make you responsible.
No. I'm saying as a data officer, there's in the paperwork, it says that the data officer has reviewed and that you're indicating that you have found it to be accurate. Forget I'm a provider also. I'm talking in the sense of a data officer doesn't that put some responsibility that they shouldn't be signing it unless they absolutely are certain, because they are responsible for you taking that at face value?
Right.
If there's, it's okay that
And-
the materials are correct.
And Lucelli and Carling, do we continue to request that in the reports that are submitted?
You're no longer?
Yeah, they're not,
No.
yeah. I mean, we understand.
The information that we request, I can speak to the performance measures, is at the beginning, we ask who is completing the report. And
Right.
the reason why we ask for that information is more so to be able to follow up if we have questions after we do our review. So some of you have already received calls and emails from Carlin and myself because we've been following up about the performance measures. So it's just easier for us if we know who completed the report, that we're able to follow up with you. There's not, on the performance measures, there's not a signature, like a signature page that says that you certify the information.
Right.
Yes.
And
But didn't-
I guess at one point, Diane, that was contemplated, and we understood that you know, the problems, if you will, with that. And I want to also emphasize something else. The data reporting, this is not a gotcha. It's not a gotcha. In fact, I encourage people, providers and data officers, to actually think of it as just the opposite. This is bragging rights. This is your opportunity to show the progress that has been made with the influx of state funding. And so our goal is not to, you know, penalize anybody. Our goal is not to catch people in mistakes. That is absolutely not our goal. Our goal is actually to brag about the tremendous progress that is being made as a result of this state's commitment to improving the quality of representation.
I believe in, at least in the early days, it was perceived as a tool, perhaps as a way to nudge the county and the providers to do what they were supposed to, because if the data officer, who's the primary contact, didn't think things were going the way they should, that it could have that, you know, hammer to go along with, you know, this is what you're supposed to do, as saying, I'm not going to basically sign off, say things are okay unless you do things the way they're supposed to be done. So now at this point, it's totally up to them, that you're taking the data officer out of that kind of a pressure situation with the counties, which I think is a good idea. That's what I was concerned about.
Yeah. Yeah. And that's, you know, again, you know, I think you hit the nail on the head. You know, it's not going to help get better data if people are responding to pressure as opposed to people responding to support, guidance, clear, concise, but complete information. And so, you know, that's exactly what Lucelli and Carline and Melissa and all the researchers are really working hard on, is making sure that you have those tools so that you can use, you know, that leverage to work with the providers on building the infrastructures and the protocols that they need to ensure that they're collecting the information so that they can provide thorough and accurate reports.
All right. Well, thank you, Patricia, for clarifying this, and thank you all for the questions you've brought up so far. As I said before, if there's any other questions, please let us know. For now, I will continue with the third best practice, and best practice number 3 is all about understanding ILS's data requirements. And the primary function of data officers, it's been said before during this training, is to assist providers in the timely and accurate submission of required data reports to ILS. Now, what we thought we should do is point out that there are 4 main reporting deadlines, and we actually put them here on this slide. 2 reports, the ILS 195 and the annual financial report, are due on April 1st each year, and the performance measures progress reports are due twice a year, on April 30th and on October 30th. So let's have a look at what these reports then exactly are. I mean, many of you I know have been filling out these reports already. But there might also be some people on the call here that are new to the game and new to the role of a data officer. So I figured, I'll just give you a brief overview of what each report is and how they differ from each other. So first, as a data officer, what you want to do is you want to become familiar with the purpose of each report, right? So let's have a look at what the purpose is. First, for the ILS 195. So the ILS 195 is completed by the data officer, by the provider, or both. Right? The data officer and the provider can also agree on collaborating with each other to compile the data and complete the report. The purpose of the ILS 195 is to monitor attorney caseloads and staffing. It is also a purpose, or another aim is to track progress towards compliance with the caseload standards in 2023. The ILS monitors the number of arraignments and arraignment outcomes. And a final purpose is to collect data about services that are provided by attorneys, and also to collect data about case outcomes. So with regard to the ILS 195, I would like to let you know that this month, a unique link will be sent out via email that will take you to the online ILS 195 survey. And per provider, one survey should be completed. The deadline for submission of the ILS 195 this year is April 1st, 2021. And you will be asked to report data over the calendar year 2020. And we ask you to fill in part 1 of the ILS 195, which is about staffing and expenditures, and part 2 of the ILS 195, which is about caseloads. Part 3 of the ILS 195, which collects info on case activities and case outcomes, is not due until April of next year. So for this round, this April 1st submission round, you do not have to worry about part 3 of the ILS 195, since only part 1 and 2 are required this year. All right. So then let's move on to the performance measures progress reports. The performance measures progress reports, again, are completed by the data officer, by the provider of mandated representation in the county, or by both. It depends on what kind of work plan the data officer comes up with and the provider agrees to. And more on that a little bit later in this training. The purpose of the performance measures progress report is to collect data on how the funding that is available through the Harrell Herring statewide expansion contract is used. So how much has been spent and towards what? For instance, the performance measures ask to report on funding spent on hiring attorneys, on hiring non-attorney professionals, funding spent on training, funding spent on investigative and expert services. And if you have filled out a performance measures progress report before, this will sound familiar. Those are the typical things that we ask about. We ask you to report on how much of the funding has actually been spent.
We have a couple questions.
Yeah, I see them coming up. So Lucella, take it away.
So the first one from Montgomery County, will part 3 of the ILS 195, will it appear on the 2021 report?
So when you, I'm assuming that you mean when you receive a link to the online survey, that online survey is only going to appear, going to let appear part 1 and part 2 of the ILS 195. So it cuts off after part 2. You won't be asked to fill out online part 3 of the ILS 195. Now, you've seen maybe on our website or otherwise in the material section of the data officer's best practices guide that we distributed a couple days ago, that there is a PDF version of the ILS 195. That PDF version includes all of the parts 1, parts 2, and parts 3. However, what you should know is that part 3 is not required to be filled out this round. It will not be required until April 2022. So I hope that that answers the question. If not, feel free to ask for clarification.
Okay, so that
Hi.
actually,
Oh, I'm sorry, Lucelli. It's Melissa, and I see Sarah's question. Sarah and I spoke
Yes.
yesterday. So Sarah, I apologize if I created any confusion. When we were talking about the source documents, the reason we were collecting that information now is because providers were supposed to start collecting information on Part 3 as of January of this year. And so that's why we're reaching out to everyone to make sure that they've got the processes in place to start collecting that information this year. However, it will not be collected, and it doesn't need to be reported until April of 2022. So I apologize, Sarah, for that confusion.
Yeah, no problem. And you know, that is actually a good point Melissa brings up. Like, although the information for Part 3 of the ILS 195 does not have to be reported until April 2022, the ILS 195 that is due in April 2022 is going to ask you to report over the calendar year 2021. So that means that to be able to actually fill out Part 3 of the ILS 195 in a year from now, you will have to start collecting that data and recording that data as of January 1st of 2021.
there's one additional question about the performance measures.
Right.
From Lynn, on the performance measures progress report form, it says it needs information from April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. The last one that was completed was April 1st, 2020 to September 30th, 2020. So wouldn't the next one due cover the time period of October 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021?
Well, I'm actually very happy that you asked this question because you've been paying very close attention. Yes. So the dates that you mentioned are correct. We made an internal decision as the research unit and within ILS that it would probably be best to ask for the April performance measures report, to ask people to reflect back on the past year, because what we know is that, you know, the data reporting infrastructure and the capability to be able to report complete and accurate data, I mean, ideally it should all be, you know, at the highest level, but in practice, of course, people, some providers are still struggling and figuring things out. And so that was the rationale behind making the performance measures that are due in April 2021, making them reflect back over the past year and not the past 6 months. Does anybody else wants to comment on this too? Okay.
Okay.
All right. So in terms of the performance measures that we're talking about, what I would like to let you know is that at the end of March or very early April, a unique link will be sent out via email. And when you click on that link, it will take you to the online April 2021 Performance Measures Progress Report survey. Now, just like for the ILS 195, one survey per provider of mandated representation should be completed. The deadline for submission of the April 2021 progress report is April 30th, 2021. And indeed, you will be asked to report data over the past year. So the data that you report in the upcoming performance measures progress report is based on the period April 1st, 2020 through March 31st, 2021. Now, I know that this is a lot of dates. This, of course, is also very clearly stated and documented in the performance measures progress report itself. So if you go to the materials section of the Data Officer Best Practices Guide that we distributed a couple days ago, you will see that there is a PDF of the performance measures progress report, and we included the most recent one, the April 2021 one. And so you will see that these dates are clearly stated in the instructions and the definitions that are also part of this PDF document. I would like to note that there's one slight exception. There's some questions, and those questions are, for instance, the questions on attorney hires and non-attorney hires that were made. Those two questions in the performance measures progress report, for those two questions, you will be asked to report every single hire since implementation of the statewide expansion contract. So for those hires, we ask you actually to report every single hire that has been made through the statewide contract funding. Again, this is clearly stated and explained in the performance measures progress report itself. However, if people have any questions regarding that, of course, we're available to assist and to help out. All right. Then the last report that was on that overview of reports that are due, the annual financial report. As said before, the annual financial report is completed by the county. And the purpose of the annual financial report is to collect data on how much money was spent on indigent legal services in the previous calendar year. And this report not only asks about the statewide expansion contract funding, that is what the performance measures progress report is focused on. Now, in addition, this annual financial report asks about any other funding streams as well. So it's not only limited to the statewide expansion contract funding. Later this month, the annual financial report will be sent out again via email, and that will go to the county executive or the county financial person with the chiefs of each mandated representation provider in the CC. As this report is a county responsibility, data officers will not be included on that email. So you won't actually receive that.
Sorry, we have two questions.
Right.
I'm assuming, Diane, that this question is regarding the performance measures. Does that also include increasing a part-time to full-time?
Yes, what I'm talking about, it isn't a new hire necessarily, but if you have someone that was already a part-time salaried person, that Hurl Herring funds are used to increase that person to full-time, you want us to show any of those going back to the beginning?
Yes, Diane, thank you so much for bringing that up, because actually you're right. Sometimes the statewide contract funding is used to, increase the number of hours of an existing position. And yes, those things are, we ask you to report those as well at those attorney and non-attorney hire questions in the performance measures progress report. So it's not only about new hires. So thank you for bringing that up.
And the other one that might be confusing for newer data officers, you want us to include everybody from the inception of the contract, because Yates County is an example. We've had numerous people that have been hired and have left and have hired. We still count each one of those that are no longer with us when we do the year-end one. Is that what you're telling us to do?
Here, I'm going to refer to my colleagues as well, because
it would make it look like there's so many more people that are working that really aren't.
Well,
because just been refilled.
what I recall from the instructions and definitions that are included on the performance measures progress report is that in the case that, there's this position and the initial individual that took that position, that attorney position, left, and then there is a rehire for that same position,
You don't get it again.
you would, I believe, only report it once because it's the same position. And you're right. The reason why we do that is to not, kind of inflate numbers where there's really only one position.
I just want to make sure that didn't happen, because by you saying everything that happened within the year, you could potentially have had a person there and then left and another person, and you might have 2 or 3 showing for one slot. And that, I just didn't want that to be a problem.
Right. No, thank you for bringing that up. You're correct. And, to reassure people that are on the call that are thinking maybe like I'm just new to this game and I have no idea what they're talking about. The performance measures progress report includes very extensive and elaborate instructions and definitions at each question. So all of this information that we are currently talking about, it is actually specified in the document itself, and it explains to you in these particular cases how you should report the position. However, of course, it could be confusing, and in that case, Luchelli and I and the rest of the research team, we are always available to answer any questions and to assist you. So in case you are in doubt or you're not exactly sure what we mean, just give us a call or shoot us an email, because we can just quickly clarify it and make sure it's all accurate and complete.
And there's still one additional question from Madeline. Does the annual financial report need to be filled out by an institutional provider and the assigned counsel, or can it only be submitted on behalf of the county?
So what I know about the annual financial report is that in the end, the county executive or the county financial person signs the form and submits it. So from that, I assume that the annual financial report is really completed at the county level. Now, that is not to say that maybe, a county executive or a county financial person may, in some cases, reach out to providers to check with them. I don't know if that happens, but it is truly a county level report. However, if anybody else wants to chime in on this, please speak up.
Because the report includes all of the mandated funding, all of the funding for mandated representation in the county, it has to be a county level report because it's got to include all the information regarding all the providers. And so both under the county law, it's required by it's a required county submission. And then of course, just practically speaking, it needs to be a county submission, but it's exactly as Caroline said, there may be times that the county is reaching out to the providers for more discrete information to ensure that the county can accurately complete the report.
Right. All right. So what I would like to mention before I go to the next topic, as I've referred to before, a PDF form of each of these reports that we discussed is included in the materials section of the best practices guide. And so we recommend each data officer to review these PDF documents of these reports so that you are up to date about all of ILS's data reporting requirements. It gives you the opportunity to already see what questions you will be answering once those reports become due, and it also gives you the opportunity to be prepared and to communicate with your providers like, this is the information we're looking for, this is what we need to be ready for. Are there any other questions about ILS's data reporting requirements at this point? All right, then I am going to move on to the best practice number 4. And this best practice focuses on learning about each provider's case management system. And a functional case management system will make adhering to the ILS data collection and reporting requirements easier. It is imperative that each provider has a case management system. And as the data officer, you should work with each provider to ensure that their case management system is able to record all of the data that are outlined in our requirements. To give you an idea, the most commonly used case management systems include, but are not necessarily limited to, Defender Data, Laserfish, Logis, Pika, Intellinx, Law Manager, NiceDesk PDCMS is a frequently used one, and Takana. And what you as the data officer should do is, one, learn what system each provider of mandated representation uses and how they use it. If there is no case management system, you as the data officer may also play a role in acquiring a new case management system and doing some research as to what case management systems would work and would best fit the growing data reporting requirements. Second, as the data officer, you also want to make sure that the case management system at each provider records all the data required by ILS. And the information that is reported in the case management system is crucial during ILS data reporting periods. And it is, of course, very important that accurate and complete data be entered into the case management system. Any questions at this point about case management systems? I would like to let you know that ILS is also there to connect you. To connect, for example, providers in your county to providers in different counties that have experience with a case management system that you might be exploring or considering to adopt. We are happy to make those connections between data officers and between providers of mandated representations across New York State. So in case that you think that would be helpful, please reach out to us, and we're happy to get you in touch with each other. All right. Then we've arrived at the 5th and final data officer best practice. And data officers play actually an important coordinating role in data reporting. And what I would like to say here is, of course, whether it is the data officer or the provider who compiles the data needed to complete each report and ultimately submits the report, it will differ between mandated representation providers. However, it is the data officer's job to coordinate with the providers to ensure that all the data is collected in an accurate and timely manner. And it is important for data officers to keep track of which reports are due when, particularly actually because some reports, for instance, the ILS 195 and the Performance Measures Progress Report, they use the exact same survey site, QuestionPro, for report submission. So this may lead a provider actually to think that they have fulfilled all data reporting requirements because they filled out a report through the survey site, while in reality, only one of the 2 required reports may have been submitted. So that is something to keep in mind and to make sure that that doesn't happen. The data officer should develop a work plan that specifies who compiles what data and who completes and submits which report. And ILS actually recommends specifying some deadlines in this work plan so that there is sufficient time for the data officer to review the report for accuracy and for consistency before submitting it to ILS. And one of a part of this best practice on your coordinating role is that ILS strongly recommends each data officer to review reports such as the ILS 195 and the performance measures before they are submitted to ILS, especially in cases where the provider compiles part of the data. It is just an extra check that we can build in to make sure that the data that is reported is as complete and as accurate as possible.
We have a question from Sarah. What is the fall 2021 deadline for the performance measures progress report?
That is October 30th, 2020. Oh, 2021, sorry. I'm a year behind. All right. Now, as part of this coordinating role, and here we go, we introduced the idea of source documents and the ILS 195 source document form. Now, I want to spend a little bit of time during this training clarifying a bit more what that is and what the utility of this is and what you should be doing. Because I recognized, and you know, my colleagues at our research team recognized that there was a little bit of a confusion regarding these source documents and the ILS 195 source document form. And we apologize for any confusion that we may have created. And I hope by, you know, taking you through this, I will hopefully take away any confusion. Please, though, please feel free to ask any questions in case, you know, you have them. So let's see. So one thing that data officers should do as part of their coordinating role is to collect and to review source documents at each provider. Now, a source document refers to the document or the source from which the information originates for each individual case that is entered into the provider's case management system. So examples of source documents can include a CAFA intake form, a pre-printed case file folder, a case closing form, a voucher for reimbursement or payment, etc. And for those of you who have attended the previous data officer training on December 10, 2020, we actually talked about these source documents, and I actually showed some examples of a CAFA intake form, a pre-printed case file folder, etc. Now, data officers should collect and review all of the source documents that are used by providers in their county. Now, to assist in this and to make this process a little bit more streamlined and standardized, we have developed the ILS 195 source document form. And this is a form that we ask data officers to complete as well. It is also part of the materials section of the best practices guide. Now, the ILS source document form is different from the ILS 195. I mean, they look very similar, and I realize that they look almost the same, but the ILS 195 source document form has these gray shaded source document areas that are on the right at each question. It starts at question 11. So for the first part of the ILS 195, questions 1 through 10, there is not such gray shaded area on source documents. Starting at question 11, they will start showing up. And what we would like to ask data officers to do is to fill out all the gray shaded source documents areas on the form, because that helps you to identify what source documents are used by each provider for these questions on the ILS 195 that are filled out. So for this ILS 195 source document form, you do not have to complete the ILS 195 questions themselves. You only have to complete the gray shaded source document areas on the form. And these gray shaded areas, all they do is just ask, from what document does this information originate? What documents are used? And it can be a CAFA intake form, it could be a pre-printed case file folder, et cetera, et cetera. So completed ILS 195 source documents forms should be submitted to data@ils.ny.gov. One ILS source document form should be completed per provider. I thank all of you who have already submitted these completed forms, because many of you have, and thank you so much for that. And in addition, we also ask you to submit a blank copy of each source document that you refer to in the form. And it only has to be a blank document, so we don't need any identifying data there. Yeah.
We have a question from Madeline. Is the source document form a separate report that will be sent out?
No. Thank you for asking that. That is actually a good question. So the source document, the ILS 195 source document form is a form that we introduced during the previous training on December 10, 2020. So it was part of the previous data officer training. And we introduced that form to make it easier for data officers to get a handle on, you know, where does all the information originate from? Where do they pull all of this information from? So this is not a reporting requirement such as, you know, the ILS 195 itself and the performance measures and the annual financial reports are, but it is part. It is developed as part of your coordinating role as the data officer. And we at ILS felt that this would help you get a grip on, okay, where do they pull all of the information from? It will make more clear the process of how data is collected. And more importantly, it will also make clear data that might not be collected yet. And those, of course, are areas that we should in the future pay attention to and make sure that, you know, we undertake some steps to make sure that data is collected so that the ILS 195 can be completed. All right. Are there any other questions on any of the things we introduced to you today? Please feel free to speak up or to type your question in the chat box.
One question from Dave from Montgomery County. I don't want to go too far into the weeds, but I'm brand spanking new to this position. Welcome, Dave. And just trying to paint a full picture. Is there, or where can I find state level reporting of HH funds distributed to the counties to date?
Sorry.
Do you want me to repeat it?
Yeah, or yeah, I can read the question. So
he wants to know where can he find state level reporting of HH funds distributed to the counties to date?
Right. So if I understand your question correctly, this is part, I believe, of the performance measures progress report. When you and you know, you're indicating you're very new, so welcome to the new role of data officer. But when you go to that PDF of the performance measures progress report, in the introduction there, we state that it would be helpful when completing the form that you have access to the budget that has been put together for each provider of mandated representation in collaboration with ILS. And that budget will give you an overview of the money that is basically reserved and available to these providers of mandated representation for various things. Like you see what money there is available for attorney hires and how many positions for non-attorney hires, et cetera, et cetera. Does that answer the question, or does anybody else want to chime in too?
Is there, can you guys hear me?
Yes, yes.
Hi.
Hi.
I won't be shy. So I'm kind of looking from the opposite direction. So if the governor were to ask, hey, how much money have we sent out to each of the counties as a result of this? That's kind of what I'm looking for. I'm sure that the money that gets sent to each county is accounted for on some report somewhere, right?
So this is Patricia. If the governor asked that question, the grants unit would provide the governor with that information. And for you guys, if you want to know in your particular county how much has been claimed, we are more than happy to provide you that information.
Okay, but it's not something that's just out there to view.
No.
Okay, question answered. Thank you.
And there's actually one more question from Elizabeth. Can one example of the source document be the financial affidavit application form?
I'm going to refer to my colleagues on the phone call here because I'm not familiar with what a financial affidavit form is.
Hi, this is Melissa Elizabeth. And so I think what you're talking about is what the client would be required to complete to determine financial eligibility for the assignment of counsel. And that form could serve as a source document if any of the information collected on the form is actually required under the ILS 195. And so if your financial affidavit might include information on what the charges are, then that information might be useful for our purposes. So it really depends on what kind of information you're collecting on that form.
And I just also want to remind you that under the ILS financial standards for financial eligibility, for the eligibility standards, clients should not be required to certify or verify information on applications. So it shouldn't be the application shouldn't be an affidavit. It should just be a straight out application.
All right. Thank you for the questions. Are there any other questions at this point?
So, Carlin, if there are no other questions, this is Melissa. I just wanted to mention just a couple of things before you wrap up.
Yes,
I think
do
we
so.
can. Yes. So I just wanted to mention, as Lucelli was saying, that the listserv is the place to be and you should make sure that you're on the listserv. We are talking internally about how to make that listserv more interactive for you. We've had a couple of requests from the data officers that they're trying to connect with each other. And so we're putting together a comprehensive list like a directory so that you'll be able to reach out to each other directly if you have questions, whether it's about how an assigned counsel program, what their voucher looks like, different providers who are using different case management systems. And so we are talking about how we're going to make that more interactive this year in response to that, and also recognizing we are trying to create a data collection and data officer community. And so we want to make sure that we're facilitating that communication, even outside of the conversations that each of you have individually with us and through these trainings. The second thing I wanted to say is for our very first, I think, 2 of our trainings, we did registration. And since then, we haven't been using registration because there were a couple of glitches with it. We're probably going to move back to having registration. And again, it's just to keep track of everyone and to know who's on the calls and those things. Additionally, when we're sending out follow-up information, like on the when we updated the FAQs for the ILS 195, we wanted to make sure that everybody who attended a training was also updated, but we're trying to get all of our lists together. And so sometimes when I look at, so right now I can see that there are a couple of people calling in. And so to follow up on this particular list of attendees would be challenging because when I see there's another question coming, so I'll wrap it up. Because then I don't know who 3157 mystery 56 is. And so we'll probably move back to registration just so that when we want to follow up on a question that's asked, we make sure that we include everybody who is in that particular session. Also, I know, as I mentioned, based on Sarah's question, that it was a little confusing because we've been in this three-stage process or 3 phases of implementing the ILS 195. With the start of data collection for part 3 of the ILS 195, from 2022 on, you'll be reporting on all 3 parts of it moving into the future. So there won't be any further distinction other than the formatting of the form about what's due. Starting in April of 2022, all 3 parts will be due for reporting, and that's how it will be moving into the future. And then lastly, we've also talked internally about future data officer trainings. We had, I believe, 4 last year. We're probably going to have more than 4 this year, and we really want to target some specific questions that have been coming up a number of times. So we're working on, and we put out the list of those tentative dates, and I just wanted to let everybody know we will probably be adding a couple of more dates to those trainings. And Carline felt that it was really important that we schedule some of the trainings for right before when some data is due, so that we can do one final review with you and answer your questions again before the data is reported, because really it's about accuracy for us. And so we want to make sure that we're providing as many opportunities as possible to help you and assist the providers also in making sure we have accurate data. So those were the things I wanted to say. And I see Yvette has, how can I update the data officer's name that is listed on the ILS website for my county name? I'm not quite sure. I think, Yvette, are you asking that the listserv itself has to be updated? Because I'm not sure that we have a data officer list on the website at this point. So you can, you know what, you can reach out. Yvette, why don't you send your specific question and the solution that you're looking for? No last person on the website. Yeah, why not, we'll follow up with you afterwards. If you can send it to data@ils.ny.gov, then one of us can get back to you and make sure we address the issue that you're raising. So that was it for me. Thank you, guys.
Thank you, Melissa, for clarifying these points. That's really helpful. What I would like to mention to you all is that the recording of this data officer training, as well as the materials we've shared with you before the training, will be available on the ILS website under the data officers tab. And what we usually do after each training, we upload all of the materials and the recording of the training, so that you can review it again if you would need to do that. So please give us a couple of days, but then I think, sometime next week it should be all on there. I did see a question popping up.
From Dave, just in terms of organizing topics and conversation between all of us, Google Groups is a great message board style application that you may want to look into, and it's free. Thank you, Dave.
Thanks. All right. Well, I believe it's 12:15. So we've had a couple of good questions. Thank you so much for your participation in this training. We really appreciate all that you do. Please feel free to reach out to us if there's anything unclear, or if you want to comment or suggest some things to us. We're open to that. And if there are no other questions, then I think this is a great moment to wrap it up. And I wish you all a great day, and see you during the next training. The next data officer training is scheduled for March 11 at 11, and that is also a Thursday. All right. Thank you all. Bye-bye.